Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In the bustling city of Ukuta, university student Kamau stumbles upon an ancient scroll that leads him down a dark, mysterious path into the forgotten village of Mtindo. As Kamau uncovers secrets of an ancient cult, he finds himself marked by an ominous force. Faced with relentless shadows, terrifying whispers, and a powerful entity that seeks to consume everything, Kamau must find the strength within himself and the unity of his friends to confront the rising darkness. This thrilling African folktale unfolds across 30 intense chapters, filled with suspense, courage, and an epic battle against an ancient evil. In the city of Ukuta, known for its vibrant markets and towering buildings, people bustled through their daily lives, unaware of the ancient mystery buried beneath their feet. Kamau, a university student with a knack for uncovering secrets, found himself drawn into something far darker than he could have ever imagined. He was no ordinary student. His thirst for knowledge extended beyond books. He craved answers to questions no one dared to ask. One evening, while researching in the university's forgotten archives, Kamau stumbled upon a scroll wrapped in animal skin. It was tucked inside an old, dusty box that hadn't been touched in centuries. The parchment seemed to hum as he unraveled it, revealing cryptic symbols and a location, Mtindo, an isolated village deep in the forests, rumored to be the center of strange happenings for generations. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered, and Kamau felt a cold breeze sweep past him. His hands shook as he held the scroll. Something was wrong. It felt as if he wasn't alone. Footsteps echoed in the corridor behind him, slow and deliberate. His heart pounded. "Who's there?" Kamau called out, his voice shaky. No answer. The footsteps grew louder, but when he looked, no one was there. His breath quickened. Shoving the scroll into his bag, Kamau darted out of the archives, racing back to his dormitory. But that night, sleep didn't come easy. The symbols from the scroll danced in his mind, whispering to him in a language he couldn't understand. By morning, he made up his mind. He needed to know more. The scroll spoke of a forgotten cult, one that practiced forbidden rituals under the light of the full moon. Kamau knew he was diving into dangerous territory, but the lure of uncovering the unknown was too great. As he packed his bag to travel to Mtindo, a shadow passed across his window. It was brief but unmistakable. Someone was watching him. A chill ran down his spine. Kamau left his room, the city of Ukuta now feeling different, colder. The sun barely pierced through the thick clouds above as he made his way toward the forest. As he ventured further, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. But by whom? Or what? His journey to Mtindo had just begun, but Kamau had no idea that the secrets waiting for him in the dark forest would change his life forever. Kamau's journey to Mtindo was long and treacherous. The village lay hidden deep in the forest, far from any city, and few dared to speak of it. The narrow dirt road wound through towering trees that seemed to whisper among themselves. The air was thick with mystery, and every step he took felt like a step deeper into the unknown. As Kamau neared the village, the path split into two. One side led to a nearby town, and the other vanished into the thick fog, leading straight into Mtindo. The village was isolated, almost as if it had been forgotten by the world. His mind raced, questioning whether he should continue. He pulled the scroll from his bag, staring at the symbols again. There was no turning back now. He took the path into the fog. The trees grew taller, their branches almost clawing at the sky. Kamau heard rustling in the bushes, but every time he turned, nothing was there. The shadows seemed to move on their own, playing tricks on his mind. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his chest, like an invisible force pressing down on him. He gasped for breath, clutching the scroll. His vision blurred, and he dropped to his knees. The fog thickened around him, and the world seemed to close in. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw them, figures draped in dark robes, their faces hidden in shadows. They stood in the distance, watching him, unmoving. Kamau's heart raced, but his legs refused to move. "Welcome to Mtindo," a low, chilling voice whispered from behind him. Kamau spun around, but no one was there. The figures in the distance remained still, their presence suffocating. The weight on his chest lifted, and just like that, they disappeared into the mist. Shaken but determined, Kamau got to his feet. His breathing was shallow, but he pushed forward. The fog began to thin, and in the distance, the outline of a small village appeared. Mtindo. As Kamau approached, the village looked abandoned, lifeless. Old, crumbling houses lined the dirt road, and the only sound was the wind howling through the empty streets. But something, or someone, was watching. He could feel it. As Kamau stepped into Mtindo, the air grew cold and heavy. The village was eerily silent, too silent. Old, broken windows stared back at him like the hollow eyes of forgotten souls. A chilling wind howled, sending a shiver down his spine. Every instinct told him to turn back, but the scroll burned in his pocket, pushing him forward. A low growl suddenly echoed through the empty streets. Kamau froze, his heart racing. His eyes darted around, but there was nothing, just shadows, creeping along the walls of the abandoned homes. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. A figure darted behind a crumbling wall, too fast for him to catch a clear look. Was someone, or something, watching him? His pulse quickened, and the ground beneath him seemed to shift. Suddenly, the faint light flickered in the distance. Kamau's curiosity pushed him toward it, even as his fear whispered for him to run. As he approached the source, he saw an old, stone building, a small temple, covered in vines and moss, with symbols carved into the stone. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as it swayed in the wind. Kamau's hand trembled as he pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit room. Candles flickered on the walls, casting strange shadows that danced around the space. In the center of the room stood an altar, an ancient stone slab, stained dark red. Around it lay the remains of what looked like old ritual items, animal bones, feathers, and bowls filled with thick, congealed liquid. His stomach churned. What kind of place was this? Before he could investigate further, a sharp pain shot through his chest again, much stronger than before. He gasped for air, his knees buckling. The room began to spin, and his vision blurred. The same suffocating force pressed down on him, more intense than before. But this time, he wasn't alone. Out of the shadows, the figures appeared again, draped in dark robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They circled him, murmuring in a language he couldn't understand. Kamau struggled to stand, but his body refused to move. His heart pounded in his ears as the figures drew closer. Just as one of them reached out toward him, Kamau's vision cleared, and he saw something that made his blood run cold, a pair of glowing, red eyes staring back at him from under the hood. They weren't human. In a sudden burst of adrenaline, Kamau wrenched himself free from the invisible force and bolted out of the temple. His heart hammered in his chest as he stumbled through the village, desperate to escape the unseen eyes watching his every move. The wind howled louder now, and the shadows seemed to stretch, reaching for him. But no matter how far he ran, the feeling of being watched never left him. The village was alive with something far more terrifying than he could comprehend. Kamau didn't stop running until he reached the edge of the village. His breath came in ragged gusts, his legs burning with exhaustion. The dense forest loomed before him, its trees swaying as if whispering ancient secrets. For a moment, Kamau considered retreating into the forest and forgetting everything he had seen. But the pull of the scroll, and the secrets it promised, refused to let him go. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He wasn't alone. Slowly, he turned, and saw them. Perched on the rooftops of the crumbling houses, their dark forms barely visible against the grey sky, were dozens of the robed figures. Silent. Unmoving. Watching him. Their red eyes glowed faintly in the growing darkness, like embers in the night. Kamau's body froze. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The figures didn't advance. They simply stared, their eerie silence more unsettling than any sound. He felt trapped, their gaze pinning him to the ground. Without warning, a loud crack echoed through the air. Kamau spun around, his eyes searching for the source. The ground beneath him began to tremble. The earth cracked, and a fissure opened up at his feet, revealing a deep, dark pit. From the depths came a low, rumbling growl, and the air was suddenly thick with the smell of sulfur. Kamau stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. The robed figures remained still, their glowing eyes fixed on him. But something was rising from the pit, something ancient, something monstrous. Suddenly, a voice, low and cold, echoed in Kamau's mind. "You were chosen." Kamau gasped, his mind reeling. Chosen? For what? As the ground shook violently, the pit widened, and from within, a massive shadowy figure began to emerge. Its shape was indistinct, but its presence was overwhelming. Kamau could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, suffocating him. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground. The last thing Kamau saw before his vision went black were the red eyes of the robed figures, unblinking and unrelenting, watching as the darkness swallowed him whole. Kamau's eyes snapped open. Darkness surrounded him, but the oppressive force was gone. He blinked, trying to make sense of where he was. The last thing he remembered was the pit, the robed figures, and that voice. "You were chosen." As he slowly got to his feet, Kamau realized he was no longer in the village of Mtindo. He stood in a massive underground chamber, the walls made of rough stone, illuminated by torches that flickered with a strange, unnatural light. The air was thick with moisture, and the sound of dripping water echoed all around. In the distance, Kamau heard a soft, rhythmic chant. He followed the sound, feeling drawn toward it. His steps were cautious, but the urge to know more outweighed his fear. As Kamau ventured deeper into the chamber, the chanting grew louder. The voices were not human, low, guttural, and ancient. They seemed to vibrate through the very walls. Soon, he reached the heart of the chamber, and what he saw made his stomach lurch. At the center of the room, an enormous stone altar stood, and surrounding it were more robed figures, their faces hidden as before. The altar was drenched in dark, sticky liquid, and the air reeked of iron. Animal bones, twisted and broken, littered the ground. This was no ordinary ritual, it was something far darker, something forbidden. Kamau pressed himself against the cold stone wall, his mind racing. His breath was shallow, and he fought the urge to bolt out of the chamber. The robed figures continued their chant, their movements slow and deliberate as they raised their hands toward the altar. Then, the chant stopped. Dead silence. Kamau's heart pounded in his chest as the figure at the head of the group stepped forward, lifting something from the altar. In the flickering torchlight, Kamau saw it clearly, a strange object, shimmering with a dark energy. It looked like an ancient relic, a talisman carved with symbols similar to the ones he had seen on the scroll. The figure turned, as if sensing Kamau's presence, though he was hidden in the shadows. The figure's glowing red eyes locked onto his, then Kamau felt an ice-cold fear grip his heart. The figure raised the relic toward him, and Kamau's entire body seized with pain. "Chosen," the figure said, its voice echoing unnaturally in Kamau's mind. "You cannot run." A force gripped Kamau's chest, pulling him toward the altar. He screamed, his body contorting in agony as he was dragged across the stone floor. The figures surrounded him, chanting once more, their voices rising into a frenzy. As Kamau's vision blurred, he saw the relic glow brighter, pulsing with dark energy. His mind screamed for him to fight, to escape, but his body refused to obey. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the figure lowering the relic toward his face. When Kamau awoke, he found himself lying on the cold ground outside the village of Mtindo. The forest stretched out before him, bathed in the eerie light of the moon. His body ached, and his clothes were soaked with sweat. He blinked, trying to shake the disorientation, but something felt wrong. Slowly, Kamau got to his feet, his head spinning. He reached up to rub his forehead, and froze. There, etched into his skin, was a symbol. It was faint but unmistakable, the same symbol from the scroll, the same one he had seen carved on the ancient relic. His hand trembled as he traced the lines of the mark. Panic surged through him. What had they done to him? Kamau stumbled toward the village, his mind reeling. The red-eyed figures, the chanting, the relic, it was all real. But what did it mean? Why had they marked him? And what was the purpose of this dark cult? As he walked, he heard something in the distance, a rustling in the trees. He stopped, holding his breath. The rustling grew louder, closer, as if something was following him. His pulse quickened, and he broke into a run, the sound of footsteps trailing behind him. Without warning, a figure leaped out of the shadows, tackling Kamau to the ground. He struggled, thrashing wildly, but his attacker was strong. Kamau caught a glimpse of his assailant, a young woman, her eyes wild with fear. "Get off me!" Kamau shouted, kicking her away. He scrambled to his feet, ready to defend himself, but the woman didn't advance. Instead, she stood there, panting, her eyes fixed on the mark on Kamau's forehead. You're one of them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They marked you." Kamau's heart raced. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" The woman took a step back, shaking her head. "You need to leave. Now. They'll come for you. They always come for the marked ones." Kamau's blood ran cold. "Who's coming? What do they want with me?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Kamau stood frozen, his mind spinning. Whoever this woman was, she knew something terrifying. But before Kamau could process what had just happened, he heard a distant cry. The ground began to tremble beneath his feet once more. He glanced back at the village of Mtindo, and his blood turned to ice. The robed figures were coming. Their red eyes glowed in the night, and they were getting closer. Kamau's instincts screamed at him to run, and he did. His feet pounded against the dirt road as he fled through the forest, the sounds of chanting and footsteps growing louder behind him. The shadows stretched longer, twisting unnaturally in the moonlight, as if the night itself was chasing him. Branches snapped underfoot, and the wind howled like a living creature, clawing at his clothes and skin. Kamau's heart raced, adrenaline surging through his veins as he dodged low-hanging branches and stumbled over roots. His breath came in short, desperate gasps, but the relentless pursuit continued. He dared a glance over his shoulder and saw them, the robed figures, their eyes burning red, moving swiftly through the trees. They were gaining on him, their chants growing louder, vibrating through the air. Kamau pushed himself harder, his legs burning with effort, but no matter how fast he ran, they seemed to close the distance effortlessly. Suddenly, Kamau tripped. He hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his ankle as he tumbled down a steep embankment. He landed in a shallow creek, the cold water shocking him back to his senses. His ankle throbbed, but he forced himself to stand, limping toward the cover of the dense foliage. The chanting was close now, too close. Kamau ducked behind a large boulder, trying to calm his racing heart as the figures approached. He held his breath, praying they wouldn't find him. But as they neared, Kamau realized with horror that the ground beneath him was glowing faintly. The mark on his forehead began to burn, pulsing with a dark energy that he couldn't control. The glow intensified, betraying his hiding spot. The figures stopped. Their heads turned in unison toward the boulder where Kamau crouched, and the chanting ceased. Then, in one swift motion, they advanced. Kamau had nowhere to run. Kamau's heart pounded in his chest as the figures surrounded him. He tried to scream, but his voice caught in his throat. The red-eyed cult members moved slowly, methodically, their dark robes flowing like shadows. Kamau's mind raced, he was trapped, and the mark on his forehead blazed with an intensity that was almost unbearable. Just when he thought it was over, a violent gust of wind tore through the trees, scattering leaves and branches. The cult members froze, their heads turning sharply toward the sky. In that instant, Kamau felt the mark on his forehead shift, it burned hotter, brighter, and suddenly, a strange force erupted from him. The ground trembled, and a massive crack split the earth open beneath the feet of the cult members. They stumbled, caught off guard, as a deep, guttural roar echoed from the depths of the crack. Kamau's eyes widened in horror as something began to rise from the darkness, a massive, writhing shadow, its form barely visible, but its presence undeniable. The cult members backed away in fear, their red eyes flickering with uncertainty for the first time. Kamau stumbled to his feet, barely able to comprehend what was happening. The shadow loomed larger, its shape twisting and coiling like a serpent. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't part of the cult's plan. Suddenly, the shadow lunged, engulfing one of the robed figures in its dark tendrils. The cult member's scream was cut short as the shadow swallowed them whole. The others tried to flee, but the shadow was relentless, snatching them one by one and dragging them into the crack. Kamau watched in stunned silence, his heart racing as the cult members disappeared into the darkness. The shadow turned toward him, its form shifting unevenly. Kamau braced himself, certain that he would be next. But instead of attacking, the creature paused. Its formless face seemed to study him, the pulsing light of the mark on his forehead reflected in its shifting form. Then, with a low, rumbling growl, the shadow spoke, not with words, but with a voice that reverberated through Kamau's mind. "You are not ready." And just like that, the shadow retreated into the crack, disappearing as quickly as it had come. The earth closed up behind it, leaving no trace of the cult members or the horrific scene that had just unfolded. Kamau stood there, breathless and trembling. What had just happened? The creature, the crack in the earth, the destruction of the cult members, it was all too much to process. But one thing was certain, something far darker and more dangerous was involved than he had realized. Kamau wandered back toward the village, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The night air was thick with tension, and every rustle of the wind sent shivers down his spine. He had to figure out what the mark meant, why the cult wanted him, and what that shadowy creature was. As he reached the outskirts of Mtindo, Kamau heard a voice call out to him from the shadows. He spun around, fists clenched, ready for another confrontation, but instead, a hooded figure stepped out of the darkness. Unlike the cult members, this person's robe was grey, and their face was visible, an old man, his eyes sharp and intelligent. "I know what you seek," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "And I know what haunts you." Kamau narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" The old man pulled back his hood, revealing a long scar running across his cheek. "I am someone who escaped them. They marked me once, just like you. But I fought back." Kamau's eyes widened. You are one of the marked? The man nodded, his gaze darkening. The cult seeks to control those who bear the mark. But you, Kamau, you have awakened something far worse. The shadow you saw, it wasn't meant to be unleashed. And now, it will follow you. Kamau felt a chill run down his spine. What is it? What does it want? The shadow is older than the cult, older than anything you can imagine, the man replied, his voice grim. It's not a creature, it's a force. It feeds on fear, on darkness, and it has been waiting for someone like you. Kamau took a step back, his heart pounding. What do you mean, someone like me? The old man's eyes locked onto Kamau's, unblinking. You are the key to its freedom. The cult knows it. That's why they marked you. But you are not their puppet, you can still break free. Kamau clenched his fists. How? There is a place, the man said slowly, his voice dropping to a whisper. A place where the mark can be removed. But the journey is dangerous, and once you start, there is no turning back. Kamau's mind raced. He had no choice, he couldn't keep running forever. If there was a way to remove the mark, he had to take it. But he also knew that whatever lay ahead would be more dangerous than anything he had faced so far. I'll do it, Kamau said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Tell me where to go. The old man nodded, his face grave. Go to the Valley of the Shadows. There you will find what you seek. But be warned, others have tried before you, and none have returned. Kamau swallowed hard, his resolve firming. I'll take my chances. The old man stepped back into the shadows, his voice lingering in the air. Then may the spirits protect you, Kamau. You will need all the help you can get. The next day, Kamau set off for the Valley of the Shadows. The name alone sent chills through him, but he knew there was no other way. The old man's warning echoed in his mind, none had returned. Yet, Kamau felt the pull of something deeper, a strange calling from within the mark itself. It was as though his fate was bound to the valley, and no matter how much he feared it, there was no avoiding what lay ahead. The journey to the valley was long and treacherous. Kamau trekked through dense forests and jagged mountains, the air growing colder and heavier with each passing mile. He could feel the mark on his forehead tingling, as if it could sense the dark power waiting for him. After days of travel, Kamau reached the entrance of the valley. It was a desolate place, shrouded in mist and silence. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, and Kamau could barely see more than a few feet in front of him. As he stepped into the valley, the mark on his forehead began to burn fiercely, pulsing with energy. Kamau gritted his teeth, determined to press on. He had to find the place where the mark could be removed. But as he ventured deeper into the valley, something strange began to happen. Shadows danced at the edge of his vision, flickering in and out of existence. Whispers filled the air, voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Kamau's heart pounded in his chest as the shadows grew thicker, twisting and writhing like living creatures. And then, out of the darkness, the figure emerged. It was the woman from before, the one who had warned Kamau about the cult. But her eyes were different now, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. She smiled at him, the twisted, haunting smile that sent chills down Kamau's spine. I told you they would come for you, she said, her voice echoing unnaturally in the cold air. But you didn't listen. Kamau took a step back, his mind racing. What are you doing here? The woman's smile widened, and her voice grew darker. You thought you could escape the mark. But there is no escape. The valley is alive, Kamau. It knows your fear. Before Kamau could react, the shadows around him surged forward, wrapping around his body like tendrils. He struggled, but the more he fought, the tighter they gripped him. The whispers grew louder, filling his ears with strange, unintelligible words. And then, just as Kamau felt himself slipping into darkness, the woman leaned in close, her voice a chilling whisper in his ear. "You will never leave this place." The valley had claimed him. The valley has claimed Kamau. He has slipped into darkness. Will he make it out? Join us on the next epic episode to find out.